So hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us today for this workshop on resisting police overreach into specifically immigration control, as part of the Stand Up, Speak Out training series on toolkits for resisting the hostile environment. As a kind of preliminary note, this is being recorded and will be uploaded onto YouTube. So please, if you don't want to kind of your face to show up on the recording, please turn off your camera. I think we'll just start by introducing ourselves. So we're from Stop the Scan, which is a joint campaign between the Racial Justice Network and Yorkshire Resists. The Racial Justice Network is an anti-racist charity based in West Yorkshire that seeks to address colonial legacies by seeking transformative and reparative justice across holistic and environmental and economic and spiritual and cultural dimensions. And Yorkshire Resists is a network of organisations and individuals working to resist the hostile environment across Yorkshire. And together we launched the Stop the Scan campaign to fight against police use of mobile fingerprint scanners, originally across West Yorkshire, but now across England and Wales. Personally, my name is Carys Coleman. I work at the Racial Justice Network, which I might refer to as RJN from here on out. I work as Campaign and Litigation Support for the Stop the Scan campaign. And outside of that, I'm also a researcher looking at the kind of harms of biometric and data-driven systems, particularly as they are used as tools of oppression in migration systems in Europe and the UK. Today, I'm also joined by Toni and Laura. If you'd like to introduce yourselves briefly.
Hi, I'm Toni. I also work at Stop the Scan. I'm the project coordinator for the project and I've been a part of the campaign since 2018. Pass to Laura.
Hi everyone, my name's Laura. I am part of Yorkshire Resists. I've been part of the campaign since 2018, and thank you guys so much for joining us. Carys?
Brilliant, thanks guys. So just to give a kind of overview of our workshop structure today, we're going to start with a kind of broader discussion, warm-up activity on surveillance, so kind of the types of surveillance we might encounter and the harms brought about by surveillance. And then we'll move on to exploring specifically the forms of mobile biometrics that are the focus of the Stop the Scan campaign. And we'll talk about who they affect, how they affect them. And then following this, we'll address that burning question of what can you do? And so we're going to explore this through kind of know your rights advice, and we're going to do some kind of practice scenarios where we'll go into kind of breakout rooms and feedback from there. And finally, Laura's going to take us through a Skillshare on the importance of freedom of information requests, when they can be useful in resistance work, how you can use them, and some kind of tips and challenges in making a freedom of information request. And sometimes we'll try not to use acronyms, but if we forget, sometimes we refer to freedom of information requests as FOIs. And at the end, hopefully we'll have kind of 10 minutes, 15 minutes for question and answers. So throughout the workshop, we're hoping to make this kind of an interactive session. So please feel free to turn off your mic when you want to contribute, stick up your hand, and you can also post in the chat box, and we'll try and monitor the chat box to look out for contributions there. But of course, be mindful of sharing any kind of sensitive information, because this is a public event, and also it is being recorded and will be uploaded onto YouTube. Okay, so what is surveillance? It's a term we're probably all very familiar with, particularly working within this kind of the themes of the Stand Up, Speak Out series. But surveillance basically refers to the systematic monitoring of individuals, groups, or places and spaces for the purpose of gathering information, maintaining security, or exerting control. It could take various forms, including visual observation, electronic monitoring, data collection, analysis, and tracking of communications. It can be conducted by governments, corporations, law enforcement agencies, intelligence services, or an amalgamation of these different entities through, for example, public-private partnerships. And of course, we can't talk about surveillance without talking about the ethical, legal, moral, and privacy concerns, particularly when it involves indiscriminate monitoring, infringements on individual rights, and mass data collection. And I think these questions are so pertinent for us now, because in this modern digital age, we see the kind of chasing and the proliferation of numerous kinds of technologies and tactics that simultaneously pose a potential threat to us all, but doubly impact historically over-policed, marginalised, and often racialised communities. And so to kind of illustrate some of this ubiquity and just to kind of get our brains working, we've got a few pictures on the slides of different types of surveillance. And we'd really like it if people could volunteer either in the chat or by raising your hand to identify what these pictures are, if you recognize them, what they're showing. Okay, so maybe so Roz has said B is a body cam. Yeah, the police body cameras, which I've heard some activists say they're facing the wrong way. So often they record the targeted person and they don't record, they don't face towards the police officers. So Marion has said C is tag, a GPS ankle tag. So now this is being used to kind of monitor people seeking asylum, tracking GPS coordinates. So this really is taking surveillance with you everywhere in your life. F, we've got security cameras. Yeah, these are kind of specific type of security cameras. Does anyone know what they might be? So these are ANPR cameras, automated recognition of number plates, so tracking people's number plates in their car. Yeah. Sorry if I'm missing anyone's hands in the chat. I can't see any. No, cool. Yeah, Rosa said E is police liaison officers. So I like the way Rosa's put it. They try and be chummy and gather intelligence at protests. So although they're not technological, we still can think of them as a form of surveillance, right? Because it's about gathering information, data monitoring in order to exert control in that sense. What about A? Oh, Alice has put A, facial recognition cameras. Yeah, so these are live facial recognition cameras. We see them deployed quite a lot recently at protests. And finally, we have D. Does anyone recognize D? No, okay, so maybe, yeah, okay, free to be me and Lucy from the Hummingbird Project. Yeah, they're biometric fingerprint scanners, which is what we're here to talk to you today about, and we'll get a bit more into that in a second. So in terms of what are the harms of surveillance, we find that it crushes self-expression. People faced with this kind of ubiquity of being surveilled feel that they can't express themselves fully, which should be a kind of human right. B, despite it being kind of often talked about as a kind of efficient use of public money, we find that it kind of costs a lot of money, often with kind of little results, and certainly with not protecting communities. C, it isolates people from wider society. It erodes trust between people. It threatens human rights. It causes psychological harm and trauma, often re-traumatization, particularly if you're someone who's migrated. And finally, we find that it reinforces racism that already takes place. So we've spoken more generally about surveillance to set the scene. But now we're going to talk briefly about mobile biometrics, so the focus of the Stop Scan campaign. So by mobile biometrics, we refer to devices that can check biometric information on the go, and mobile fingerprinting devices are kind of one of the primary biometric devices police use to carry out identity checks. So these devices enable police officers to remotely search a person's fingerprint against law enforcement databases, but also against immigration databases. And they do this using a scanner and an app on the police officer's mobile phone. And these kind of checks can happen, for example, in roadside stops, in street corners, at places of work, in parks, and if there's a match against the law enforcement or immigration database, the police officer could ring the Home Office. They could take you to a detention or removal center, or they could even arrest you. And our kind of chief concerns here is that this brings the police station and the hostile environment to the streets. So now you have immigration checks happening in street corners, roadside stops, public places. It's another kind of public service that that further isolates, marginalized, and potentially re-traumatizes racialized and migrant communities. And so we also see it as a kind of tool, another tool of racist policing and harassment. So while officers have been able to remotely check fingerprints against law enforcement databases since about 2013, I think, its police capacity to remotely check immigration databases, that's the new part, and has been enabled under a kind of wider Home Office biometrics program. And this was first trialed in West Yorkshire in 2018. So that's how the campaign started. We're based in West Yorkshire, and we heard from the communities we work with and support about the fears of the police and the Home Office, and how these devices would increase that fear and increase that sense of isolation and of being targeted. So you can see on the screen a quote from a participant of a survey we did, talking where people were talking about how they felt about these scanners. And the participant, who is someone who's migrated, says, "For years, I've been fearful of accessing public services, including the NHS or the police, because of their association with the hostile environment. This would merely add to that." So this kind of increasing over-policing, targeting throughout someone's life. So we set up a series of meetings across kind of local community spaces with different people concerned in 2018. A lot of the anger there was that this was being trialed in our communities without there even being kind of consultation with those who would be impacted. And this eventually evolved into the Stop the Scan campaign, where we've been calling for a firewall between police and the Home Office, and an end to the rollout of these mobile fingerprint scanners. I'm now going to pass on to Toni, who's going to talk about who this affects and then run through some kind of potential scenarios.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much, Carys, for that really brilliant introduction. I saw that people were typing a lot in that last section, so I hope that we'll continue that energy. But I'd just love to hear, you've probably got some inclinations and clues from Carys earlier on as to who might be affected, but if people want to either put up a hand and turn their mic off, or just throw some suggestions in the chat box of what types of communities, maybe what demographics could be particularly affected by mobile fingerprint scanning. Delivery drivers, yeah. For sure, people, yeah. So Roz has written delivery drivers and people seeking asylum. Yeah, absolutely would agree there. Obviously, as we see, like with the connection between the immigration database and the police database, there's a crossover there of people who are already being policed and people who already have a migration history. And lots of delivery drivers tend to be migrants and people of colour at the same time. And quite often the devices are deployed during road stops. So delivery drivers, unfortunately, could be a prime target. Same with people seeking asylum. Yeah. Marion's written people of colour. Yep. Alice with protesters as well, particularly racialized individuals. And then Beck's written those vulnerable to stop and search. So radicalized, homeless, and young people. Yep. Again, yep, disabled people, young people in working class areas. Yeah, these are all really good suggestions. Yeah, so you've captured basically like our suggestions and more. Like, so as we know that these devices specifically target migrants, they target racialized people, and they target over police communities. So this could be working class people or particular ethnic groups like Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities, Black communities, Asian communities. And from our research that we've done over the past few years, we know that, for example, Black people are 4 times more likely to be stopped and scanned than a white person, and Asian people are also twice as likely to be stopped and scanned than a white person. This type of intelligence-based policing already balances information which is biased or targets people with prior experience with either the police or Home Office with a veneer of objectivity just because it's technology. So I think that you guys have really, like, in your suggestions, really got to the core of what policing already does, what immigration enforcement already does and who it targets, and how this device is just another way to unfortunately target those people. Marion, as well, your suggestion about disabled people, would completely echo that as well. It's not something that's been captured in our data because we've done FOIs and the sort of data collected by police doesn't cover those demographics, but without a shadow of a doubt, especially neurodivergent people and people with mental illnesses, we know that, you know, if you're racialized and you have this sort of intersection of identity as well, that you're much more likely to be treated with aggression and to be treated with rougher sort of policing techniques. So would absolutely, yeah, echo that. So obviously we've hit you with a lot of information. So we're hoping that this can be an opportunity for people to feel empowered and emboldened to intervene if you witness this sort of scan taking place, or if you are affected, to maybe know some techniques which could potentially either de-escalate with police officers, and can also just outline what your rights are regarding a scan. Unfortunately, this technology is currently legal and it's well supported and well funded by the Home Office and by the wider state. However, there are still ways that we can protect each other, and there are still ways that we can defend ourselves from even further discriminatory type of policing. So yeah, we've created some Know Your Rights booklets, and these resources are here basically to give advice on what you can do during a scan, and also to provide some contacts for solicitors who offer 24 hours free advice. And if you're interested in potentially learning of any further local legal support, or you could offer some legal local support, we're also really open and willing. So we'd be happy to stay in touch either afterwards, or like let us know maybe during the question and answer section at the end if there's any sort of support you'd be willing to offer as well. And yeah, these booklets, we also have multiple translations, which we were really supported by our community. We had an amazing outreach of volunteers. So currently we have translations in Romanian, Italian, Albanian, Urdu, Arabic, Pashto, Farsi, Sarani, Tigrinya, Mandarin, French, Russian, and Spanish, with more on the way. So these are available to print and download from our Yorkshire Resists Instagram, and you can also contact us if you need us to send you any already printed. So now I'm going to go into the Know Your Rights booklets. If we could go to the next one. So when can the police scan your fingerprints? So in order for them to scan your prints, they need to have two conditions. The first is that they have to suspect you of committing an offence. And the second is that you either don't provide your details, or they suspect for whatever reason the details that you've provided are fake. So you can obviously see how that's a kind of problematic place to start anyway. You know, this idea of intelligence-based suspicion is always something that is, you know, it's esoteric, it's hidden knowledge, it's something we don't get to access. So if you feel confident and calm in those situations, I would always suggest at least challenging the intelligence as to why they suspect you of committing a crime, also why they suspect that your details are false. And as you can see on the slide, if they stop you based on your race or your ethnicity or your nationality, this is illegal. So it is something to keep in mind, especially if you're witnessing someone else being scammed. So if the police are questioning your identity, there's a few things that you can remember. The first is that you don't have to give your ID or your details if you're not suspected of an offence. So if you're being stopped by a police officer, it's always best to ask them, you know, what type of stop is taking place. If it's a stop on account, you can leave that situation and you're not obliged to give your details. So it's always good to remember that there are many instances where you don't have to give your ID. You don't have to give your details. However, if you do want to show your ID, and you provide a valid ID that shows your name, address, that means you don't have to give your fingerprints. So for example, if you have a driver's license, this could be an example of an ID where you shouldn't really have to give your fingerprints. And I think, I'm not entirely sure about some of the biometrics cards, so anyone please jump in to correct me if you know. But if you have an ID that has your name and address on, this tends to be enough basically to stop a fingerprint scan taking place. And again, if your ID is not accepted, always, you know, push back, ask why, and make a note of it if you can. You know, either if you're witnessing or if it's happening to you, always just try and remember some of the reasonings. As you saw before, body-worn cameras should be worn. So there's always potential after a stop to basically get a receipt of either the stop or to try and recover that evidence. But that's probably another workshop for another time. And again, if you're searched on the immigration database, ask why you've been checked on this database, and also ask why your offence is even related to immigration. And it's just really important to interrupt this normalization of immigration being seen as a criminalized thing. And also people, if they've had experience with the criminal justice system before, they still deserve the right to privacy, and they deserve the right to like self-preservation. So yeah, always try and gently push back where you can. So we've come up with a kind of acronym to maybe help it stick in your mind a bit more if the police do want to take your prints. So as I said before, you know, try and push back a bit, but it's important if you can stay calm and composed and avoid obstructing police activities. Often police officers will let you know if what you're doing is obstructing their activities, but it's always context dependent. And again, you have the right to record your experience. You've got the right to ask for the officer's name and their shoulder number. And if the officer is in plain clothes, you always have the right to ask for a warrant card to make sure that that stop is legal. So yeah, let's stay wise. So the W in wise stands for why have I been stopped? So you can ask what type of stop is taking place and under what power. I stands for is there suspicion of an offence? So if there's no suspicion, you don't need to give your details. S stands for specific offence suspected. So again, questioning what type of offence it is specifically, particularly if it relates to immigration, and checking why they're checking particular databases according to the offence that you've been accused of or suspected of. And then finally, E, explain your grounds for suspicion. So you can ask here if you perhaps fit a description. And again, it cannot just be your age, your race and gender. And you should also ask, you know, if they're looking for an item, what type of item they are looking for, and whether it's even appropriate for the type of stop that's taking place or for the type of offence that's been suspected. So remember, stay wise. So as I mentioned before, we have a few numbers offering free 24-hour legal advice. So if any of you are protesters, you might be familiar with quite a few of these. So we've got ITN Solicitor, Commons Legal, Hodge Jones and Allen, Feynman's, Kelly Solicitors and MTC Solicitors. And yeah, they also support with immigration as well. And we've just included as well on our slide, just some advice on an arrest from Green and Black Cross. The 4 sort of things that you can remember is to say no comment during police questions, to not accept a caution, to say no to the duty solicitor, and use some of the free legal numbers that we've provided here. And again, there's Green and Black Cross have a kind of calling line. So especially if you're witnessing this type of scan taking place, they could be a really good number to ring in terms of if you're wondering what to do in terms of, you know, support if someone gets arrested, and how to best follow up with these sorts of things. So we're going to be doing a few scenarios now, and I hope that maybe the discussion earlier on has warmed you up and you feel informed. I've just seen Anu's comment about biometric cards being similar level of detail to driver's license as well. So that would be another form of ID you could show to maybe de-escalate a scan from taking place. But yeah, sorry, we're going to do some scenarios now, and we're going to break out into some breakout groups. In these scenarios, we just want you in your group to discuss your response to the situation, what potential harms could be caused, and how you could respond to that. And myself and the rest of the Stop the Scan team are going to join each of your groups, and we'll help in the discussion for the next 10 minutes. What we'll do now is a bit of a warm-up. We can go through this first scenario, and then the remaining 3 scenarios you'll work on in your individual groups. So scenario 1, you're on a train between Manchester and York, and you notice a boy being stopped by a train conductor for traveling without a ticket. The boy appears to be non-verbal and he's wearing a school uniform. The train conductor calls the British Transport Police after receiving no reply from the boy, and the police subsequently scan the child's fingerprints. So if I was Okay, great. Thanks for answering, Marion. So Carys and Lara, also feel free to join in maybe with this example. But if I was looking at this scenario, here's some things that I would consider about that. Firstly is that the boy is non-verbal and he's wearing school uniform. So this is instantly something that would flag A, sensitivity in how you might intervene or be a bystander, and B, also the fact that he's potentially underage, he's potentially not able to consent to the stop. He's not able to refer to an adult who's also consented for them. So anybody who's under 15, for example, it's illegal for an officer to take their fingerprint without a guardian or parent present. So it's always worth maybe potentially in a gentle way challenging that police officer and pointing out that maybe the boy's in uniform, the boy's potentially underage. And also in some scenarios you would film, but I think this would be a case where I wouldn't, because again, the age and his non-verbalness. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it. So yeah, I would stay wise. I would ask, why is this stop taking place? Is there a suspicion? Is there an offence? Is a suspicion of an offence? What's the specific offence? And then basically explaining the grounds as to why they are fit a description if there's a suspicion there. So if the stop is based on intelligence as opposed to witnessing something, I would always just try and push back in every aspect I could. And finally, I would probably just, if I had the money on me, I would offer to pay for the ticket and try and help de-escalate in that way. I would maybe talk to the train conductor and ask them to not call the police in this situation and try and work out another way round without getting the police involved. Carys, Lara, is there anything you would add?
Just to say that this is a real scenario that happened to a UK-born young person who was then arrested and put into a detention center and was almost deported to a country that they've never been before. So, just maybe stepping up. I know it's not easy, especially if you are part of an over-policed community, and this is why it's so important for people that are usually not targeted to step in as well. And as Toni said, consent is so important. And in this scenario, the young person isn't able to consent. So it's important that we always take that consent into consideration as well. And in some scenarios where the person isn't able to consent, for example, to being recorded, it might be that you just record the police, for example, especially if their body cams are not being used properly or are turned off as well, or just to ask for the badge number as well, the police's name, and stay wise. Carys, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe just something around if the person's nonverbal, maybe don't assume that means you can't communicate with them in some way and pretend they're not there. You can, try and communicate, and maybe they will communicate with you in nonverbal ways. But it would still be important to communicate with them, offer support, see if they have a way of letting you know what they need. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Brian, is it okay to split us up into some breakout rooms now? Okay. See you soon. Hey everyone. I think that's all of us back now. Maybe we can work backwards. So scenario 4, because you're on the screen. Would you like to feedback from your group?
Okay, then I'm going to step in and feedback. So we discussed this particular scenario, and I'm going to quickly read it. You've been stopped by police after a noise protest by a prison. You have pots and pans on you, and they conduct a stop and search. After asking for your ID, you tell them you didn't bring it with you. They ask to check your fingerprints against their mobile devices. So one of the first I think we kind of worked all the way back in that we even questioned the stop and search because, having pots and pans isn't a criminal activity. So using the whys is first asking why we're being stopped. And you made a good point in saying that it would have probably a bag and all the stuff in them. So we talked about how protest isn't criminal, like it's not a criminal act in it of itself, so that it was important to kind of push back. But we also asked if we would fit a specific description, so that was important. And then one of the things that we also mentioned around the fingerprints against the mobile devices is that, for example, if I were to be stopped, I'm pretty sure they would say that they were going to also fingerprint me against the immigration database based on my accent. So it was important to kind of push back on that and say, ask what fingerprint database they were going to scan. And if they were to say the immigration database, it would be important to push back and say, based on what? Because as you said, nationality, race, and ethnicity is not reason enough to scan you against that immigration database. We also talked about like consent and ongoing consent, in that if people, because this question was more of like what to do if you're a bystander and you see someone being stopped and potentially being scanned, and how it was really important to always kind of ask for that consent from the person that's being stopped, and that consent is an ongoing thing, so that it's always important to kind of continue to check that that person is okay in checking those. Yeah. So that's kind of, and we also talked about why it's important to always have bus cards on you, anti-raids flyers as well, so that you can hand them over if someone needs kind of that information as well.
Great, thank you. Oh, there's a question in the chat from Marion. Do you want to answer that, Laura? Oh,
Yes.
Do you mean? So
sorry, I was just reading the question. So yes, it's so important that we ask the person that's being stopped if they're okay, if they want us to intervene, if they want us to record them, or maybe they do want you to record the officers but not them, and just kind of continuously checking in on them. I think it's super important, even if you think the person is having, for example, a mental health crisis, or is someone that is houseless or in a vulnerable position. It's really important that we don't kind of just what's the word in English? Assume that we can override their consent. It's like really important that we continuously kind of check in on the person and check that they've got our consent in any way that they want us to intervene. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great. Does scenario 3 want to feedback, please?
Yeah, so I'm going to feedback just because it's being recorded for people. So the scenario is you and a group of friends are hanging out in a car, just driving to go to a party. You're stopped by the police and told that there are reports of suspicious activity by the car. Your friend driving has a full and valid Jamaican driving license. They're a student and have been studying in the UK since January. They scan his prints, and then they start to scan all the prints of your friends in the car. So we said on the line of questioning, under what power how are the suspicions related to immigration status if they're deciding to scan against the immigration database? Does the driver fit a description or the other people in the car? What is this suspicious activity by the car? So if they're saying it's something to do with speeding, then why in this scenario are they fingerprinting all the passengers in the car as opposed to just the driver? We also said that it might be a scenario in which, because it's your friends, there's kind of easier to get informed consent to film the interaction, as opposed to that kind of first scenario we did. We also mentioned that it might be potentially discriminatory behavior if they're scanning based on the fact that it's a Jamaican driving license, because a Jamaican driving license is valid to use from 12 months from when you last entered Great Britain. And then we also talked about maybe what we might do afterwards. If we wanted to submit a complaint, we might go to kind of local cop watch monitoring groups, see if they have kind of resources to submit a complaint. We can also contact Stop the Scan, that kind of thing. And then we also mentioned kind of debriefs and check-ins with those involved in terms of how is everyone feeling and recognizing that this kind of particular situation took place. So the kind of care involved after this, after the fact, as it were. Okay.
Brilliant. So in scenario 2, I'll read ours as well, just for saving time and place. So you're parked up on an A road in a lay-by and notice a police patrol en route to an incident on the A62 in the early hours. A woman is walking on the edge of the carriageway using her mobile phone torch. The woman is clearly distressed and panicked by the stop. Officers check her prints against the immigration database and detain her. So something that stood out to us, first of all, was that this woman's by herself and she's distressed. So I think most of us in the group had, if we felt comfortable and safe getting out of the car, would approach and ask, firstly, like Lara mentioned, this consent, asking if the woman's okay with us to stand by and observe. And then based on that consent, you know, there's not clear information here about her ethnicity or about her immigration status. As to why the stop's taking place, so questioning why the immigration database is being checked. We also mentioned about how wise these questions about you know, the power that's being used and why this person's suspicious and the intelligence. Obviously, a lot of the time, police can refuse to give that information to someone who the stop isn't taking place, again, the scan isn't taking place against. So we discussed using these questions as a way to be either supportive, either in a sense of reminding the police officers, or in terms of giving prompts to the person, the woman on the side of the road, that she can ask these questions. She can ask, you know, what powers, what's the suspicion, why am I being checked against an immigration database? And, you know, if there's a language barrier there, there's also a suggestion of potentially helping with interpretation. And she's just been detained. So if she's not arrested, asking her if she's comfortable, if she wants a lift in, if you're in the car, helping her get to somewhere safe. Another thing is if she is arrested or taken away, you know, she's a woman by herself in the early hours of the morning. So this person could potentially be missing. She could potentially be really vulnerable. So contacting people in our networks, in terms of community networks, organising networks, migration networks, just giving the description of this person, and just trying to see if you can find any new information, if people are looking for her. Again, if you feel comfortable getting out of the car, you have the opportunity to get the badge numbers of the police officers and what police force they're from. And that could again be an indicator of what station she may have been taken to, or if she's taken to a removal centre, what potential removal centres are nearby. And yeah, I think that was that was the most of it. If anyone else in my group wants to jump in, or in the comments maybe if you want to jump in. But otherwise, thanks everyone for sharing. Thanks for being open in your discussion groups. And I'm going to hand over to Laura now.
Okay. So sorry, do you want to talk about the making complaints, Toni or Carys? I don't think we've touched on this one.
Yeah, go on, Carys.
Oh yeah. So someone asked in the chat, if someone is detained, does that mean they can walk away? And Toni replied, no, if the police say you're being detained, you can't walk away in that circumstance. In terms of the aftermath, that was just something kind of mentioned when I was feeding back from the group then. But yeah, this idea of making a complaint. Sometimes it sucks to use a legal system that feels stacked against you, or reporting mechanisms that feel they don't work. But there is a kind of importance of building up this kind of data on this many unfair, unjust incidences have happened. So you can kind of make anonymous complaints, for example, through, I think Stopwatch have a Y-Stop app where you can submit anonymous complaints. Different Copwatch groups might have forms that you can fill in on the website to kind of talk about the incident. You can reach out to Stop and Scan. And yeah, the kind of importance of check-ins and debriefs with people involved, if there's many of you, for example, or if you do get in contact with this person, just kind of ongoing care and support. And the other thing is, you know, we mentioned Green and Black Cross's advice on if you are arrested and brought to police station, say no to a duty solicitor and to instead call one of the numbers on the bus cards. So the ones that are often on kind of Green and Black Cross's bus cards, or other groups are frequently the same ones that are on the back of our bus cards. So that's ITN Solicitors, Hodge, Jones and Allens, Bindman's, Kelly Solicitors, Coleman's Legal and NTC Solicitors. So yeah, do make use of these kind of advice, free advice, support. Okay, sorry, pass back to Laura now.
Okay, so just to kind of end the workshop, we also wanted to touch upon one of the things that our campaign has really focused on as well, which is freedom of information requests, or FOIs. So briefly, we're going to talk about what are FOIs and how you can make them, and also why they're important. I want to stress that it's not that we believe that FOIs are, you know, the key to solving, you know, over policing or policing in our communities or the hostile environment, but there are ways in which we can empower ourselves, and knowing and gathering this information is important to understand how this technology is being worked, or this is for our campaign, but anything related, for example, to your community as well. So briefly, what are FOIs? So the Freedom of Information Act of 2000 allows any individual or community to have access to information from public authorities. So they can do this in two ways. Public authorities are obligated to publish certain information. So some of the stuff that you might be looking for with regards to a particular public authority might already be on their website, for example. So it's always worth checking there. For example, the police forces already have like an FOI kind of data bank of the type of FOIs that they've been asked for, that you can access as well. And the part that's concerning to us is that members of the public can ask for specific information that they are not able to find. Okay. So how do we go about doing this? As I said, it's really important to understand what's happening in our communities. And I'm going to use Stop the Scan as the example, but this can be, you can do FOIs on anything really. So for the past couple of years, we have done FOIs to all the police forces to better understand and have a scenario on the UK-wide context as to how this technology is used. So for example, through our FOIs, we know that Police Scotland doesn't use these scanners because they have multiple concerns, particularly around the ethics of these devices. And doing these FOIs year after year, we can see if there's a consistent pattern, for example, of police forces that are not using it. We can also see the police forces that continuously refuse our FOIs, or we can see a pattern if there's sadly, there is an increase of the amount of police forces that are using these devices. So it's really good to have that information. And we also have been able to understand how these devices are being used to over-police certain communities that are already being over-policed. So for example, this is just a brief example of an FOI that we did last year where police forces in Wales were launching a pilot to add facial recognition on mobile apps. So kind of in the same way that they are able to scan your fingerprints and connect that to databases, they were launching this pilot for facial recognition software. And we did an FOI, we heard of this, we did a couple of FOIs, and we found out that, it's the same pattern of young Black men that are being stopped and scanned, and in this case, with facial recognition software. So some of the practical elements that we want you guys to kind of understand in how to do FOIs is that in order for you to do an FOI, it has to be done in a written form, okay? But there are multiple ways in which a written form is understood. You can write a letter. You can ask for the request via email. You can do this via social media, and this is really important as police forces are increasingly using social media. So you can actually write your freedom of information request on social media. There is, and hopefully we can put the link, there's a link called whatdotheyknow.org, and you can make that request, that FOI, via this website, and it will do so in an anonymous way if you don't want to use, for example, your personal email or your work email, or give your name or your organization's or community group's name. And some public offices might have an online form, and some might even use fax still, and you can use fax as well. So what next? First of all, check the public organization, the police force, the city council, check their website, because it might be that the information that you're looking for is already there. If you check the website that we put in the chat, there's also FOIs there as well. So it might be that you already have that information that you're looking for and someone else has asked for it. And these are the previous FOIs. So you submit your FOI in a written format. As we've said, there's multiple written formats. And the organization has 20 working days. So this excludes weekends and bank holidays to answer your request. If that is going to take longer than 20 working days, then they have to give you an estimate in a written format as to that they will require more time. You can also, after 20 days, if you've not heard back from this organization, give them a nudge in that you've submitted the form correctly and that 20 days have passed. Most FOIs are free unless you want a hard copy to be posted back to you, and you might have to pay for that postage. But if you're doing it in an electronic format, then it's free. So this is also kind of a good way to gather information as well. Just because you do an FOI doesn't mean that you're going to get an answer, unfortunately. And we have to be prepared for that. So it's really like one of the key things of doing an FOI is that you be as specific as possible. So if, for example, you want to know how many stop and search are happening in a particular neighborhood, then you need to be very, very specific that you need to include the postcode or postcodes of the area that you're looking for that information. So the more specific you are and the less vague you are, it's less likely to be rejected, because they won't, if it surpasses a certain amount of time, then they'll come back and say that it would require too much time and money, and therefore that is the grounds for which they reject the FOI. So as long as you are like super, super specific, it's least likely to be rejected. Other reasons is that the information is considered too sensitive, and or, as I said, that the time and money spent surpasses £450 or £600 if there are these specific. So if it's a government department, Parliament, Armed Forces, Northern Ireland Assembly, Welsh Assembly, and based in Scotland. If they do have the information that you're asking, or as part of it, they are required to assist you in reformulating your FOIs so that you get that particular answer. So for example, on occasions when we've done the FOIs, there has been, for example, one police force that says, well, we don't have all of these, but if you were to narrow it down to, let's say, questions 1 and 2, then we would be able to provide you with the information. So it's worth kind of pushing back a bit. And you can always appeal the decision as well, and or make a complaint with the commissioner as well. So don't worry about, we will be sharing these slides as well, and they will be, oh, I don't know why it's bouncing. We will be sharing the slides and in the recording, so you don't have to like write down. This is just one example of a template that you could do if you are using an email or the website, for example. And we've tried to be as specific as possible so that you can then just put the dates, for example, and the examples. I really do apologize. I don't know why it's jumping up and down. Yeah, I don't know why it's jumping again. Yeah, so again, this is just the continuation of that template. And in the request, you just have to be specific as to how you want that response to be. So for example, please send this requested information by email to, and then put the email address. And yeah, it's really important that you write the date of when you're submitting the request and count 20 working days, and then write when those 20 working days would end, and include that in your request, because this is just another way in which formally you are kind of marking the timeline as to, oh, thank you, as to when they would have to have an answer for you. And that's it. As I said, we're going to share the slides. So you don't have to write them. But if you guys have any questions on doing FOIs, importance of FOIs, as I've said, they're not the only thing that we should be doing, but it is really important to understand what's happening in our communities, and doing FOIs is just one way in which we can kind of fight back. And through our FOIs, we do notice a pattern of over-policing of Black communities particularly, but also migrant communities as well, that are being targeted. Yeah, I think I'm gonna stop there. And then so I think we've got like 2 or 3 minutes left. But yeah, if people have any questions, if you want to kind of use the chat, or if Carys and Toni, if there's anything that you want to say before we wrap up.
Just that if you would like stop this Know Your Rights booklets to distribute in your own communities, you can order them from us, and we can get them to you free of charge. And we also, in Leeds, we do walkabouts as well, like reach outs to distribute the booklets. So get in touch if you're interested in getting involved in that. And I'm also going to post our contact details in the chat in a second.